Hey guys, tonight we're not wandering through grand battles or legendary conquests. Instead, we're exploring the quiet, unsettling truth of medieval life. How a single slip, one forgotten task, or innocent error could haunt you for years and change your place in the world forever. Before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you find this content genuinely intriguing, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, find a soft corner, and let's gently step into the fragile world of medieval reputation. The merchant who miscounted a stack of coin in the market. Imagine yourself standing in a bustling medieval marketplace. The air is thick with the mingling scents of fresh bread, livestock, and the sharp tang of metal from countless coins exchanged between hands. Around you, stalls crowd narrow streets, their vendors calling out wares, textiles dyed in rich colors, shiny pots, spices wrapped in cloth, and carefully weighed silver. Among these merchants is a man who sells cloth, his stall neat and well organized. Rolled bolts of fabric are stacked behind him, and a wooden counter holds a small pile of silver coins freshly earned. The merchant counts carefully, stacking coin atop coin with a practiced hand, his eyes flicking between the pile and the customer before him. But in this delicate ritual, a single coin slips from his fingers. It falls quietly to the uneven cobblestones, lost beneath the bustle of hurried feet and passing carts. Neither merchant nor buyer notices immediately. Yet, when the customer later checks his purse, he claims he has been shortchanged. The accusation is gentle but firm. He insists on fairness. In markets of medieval towns, trust was the currency most valuable. Though coins could be melted down or clipped, and where substituted, a merchant's reputation was fragile, built slowly and shattered in moments. A miscount, whether accidental or deliberate, could ripple quickly through a community that relied on word of mouth. Despite the merchant's protests and explanations, rumors begin to spread like wildfire. Whispers twist the story, from a simple mistake to a calculated cheat. The market is a small world, and news travels swiftly on the lips of townsfolk. By midday, fewer customers approach his stall. Baskets once filled with eager hands now pause and then turn away. The merchant watches helplessly as his daily earnings dwindle. He attempts to restore trust with measured words and honest dealings, but suspicion lingers like a shadow. By dusk, the market empties, and his stall stands quiet. Fabric still folded, coins still counted, but the warmth of commerce faded. This is a small but telling moment of medieval life. Markets were the heartbeats of towns, places of exchange, socializing, and survival. But they were also delicate ecosystems, balanced on mutual confidence and the integrity of countless small interactions. A misstep, even as slight as a lost coin, could disrupt that balance. Merchants often worked long hours, juggling many customers, dealing with thieves, and facing unpredictable demands. Mistakes were inevitable, but without formal protections or guarantees, reputation was their safeguard. Once fractured, it was nearly impossible to rebuild fully. And yet, life in the marketplace went on. Other stalls filled the spaces, other voices called out, and other goods changed hands. The rhythm of buying and selling resumed, as constant as the passage of seasons. The merchant's story is not unique, but it teaches us about the fragility of trust and the quiet human drama beneath everyday transactions. It reminds us that history is often written not only by kings and armies, but also by the small, ordinary moments where lives intersect and trust is tested. So now, as you imagine that marketplace, the clatter of hooves on stone, the murmur of voices, the scent of earth and spice, think of the merchant counting his coins, feeling the weight not just of silver, but of his reputation. And know that sometimes, history is found in a single coin lost to the ground, and the ripple it sends across a town. The scribe who misspelled a noble's name in a charter. Imagine yourself sitting in a dimly lit room where shafts of pale daylight filter through narrow windows, dust motes drifting lazily in the quiet air. The scent of parchment and ink hangs thick, mingling with the faint aroma of beeswax candles burning low. This is a scriptorium, a place where the careful work of copying, drafting, and illuminating documents unfolds. Here, skilled hands craft the words that bind agreements, grant privileges, and shape the lives of medieval society. Among those hands was a scribe, an individual charged with preserving authority and law through his writing. His tools were simple yet exacting: a quill sharpened to a fine point, ink made from oak gall and iron salts, and sheets of vellum stretched taut on a wooden board. His eyes were trained to steady focus, his hand to precise motion. Mistakes were costly, for a single slip could alter meaning, offend patrons, or jeopardize reputations. One afternoon, in the early 15th century, the scribe set to work on a charter, a formal document conferring land rights and privileges to a nobleman in the region of Kent. The document was important, binding legal obligations and privileges under the seal of the king's justice. It began with the noble's title, a string of carefully chosen words intended to honor rank and lineage. But as the quill danced across the parchment, fatigue or distraction betrayed the scribe. 2 letters in the noble's name were transposed. An R and an N swapped places. The noble's name was transformed subtly, yet unmistakably, into something close enough to cause confusion and distant enough to provoke amusement. When the charter was presented in the Lord's Hall, the error was not immediately noticed. The document was read aloud during a gathering of knights and retainers. When the altered name emerged from the reader's voice, a ripple of stifled laughter passed through the room. The noble's eyes flicked toward the scribe, who sat near the chamber's edge, pen trembling slightly in his hand. Though the noble chose to respond with politeness, offering an apology for the oversight, the damage was done. Whispers began among courtiers questioning the scribe's competence. A clerk once entrusted with critical documents was suddenly seen as careless. Commissions that once flowed steadily began to thin. Requests for his skill became scarce. In a world where reputation was as valuable as coin, this marked the slow decline of the scribe's career. He continued to work, yet each commission felt heavier, fraught with doubt and the weight of past failure. His hand, once confident, grew hesitant. Colleagues avoided his company. Invitations to gatherings became fewer. The scriptorium itself was a place of both reverence and pressure. Scribes labored often in silence, illuminated manuscripts and legal texts lining rough wooden shelves. The sound of quills scratching against parchment was nearly constant. Mistakes were corrected with scraped knives or overlaid ink, but some errors, like names, could not be fully erased. This incident highlights the delicate balance between precision and human fallibility in medieval administration. Documents were the lifeblood of governance, the threads that wove noble houses, land rights, and royal decrees into a fabric of order. To err in such documents was to risk unraveling trust. Beyond the personal consequences for the scribe, the episode reveals much about the culture of medieval courts, where honor was fiercely guarded, humor was sharp but controlled, and a single slip could echo far beyond the walls of a chamber. One can imagine the scribe, alone after the gathering, sitting by the fading light, dipping his quill with care but feeling the shadow of that transposed pair of letters lingering with every stroke. Perhaps he wondered if his fate had turned on that moment, or if it was simply the nature of a life spent balancing ink and authority. His story is not one of grandeur, but of quiet human error, an echo from a world where words carried weight heavier than many stones, and where the smallest slip could become a turning point in a lifetime. And so, as the pages of history turn, the scribe's misplaced letters remain, a reminder that even in the most exacting tasks, the hand of imperfection guides us all. The baker who burned the bread meant for a feast. Imagine a small village at dawn, when the world is still wrapped in quiet shadows and the first rosy light stretches across the sky. Smoke curls softly from chimneys, carrying the scent of burning wood and warm dough. Inside a modest stone bakery, the baker stirs flour and water, the air thick with the promise of fresh bread. Today is no ordinary day. The baker has been tasked with preparing dozens of loaves for a noble's feast, a banquet that will bring lords, ladies, and their retinues together under grand banners. It is an honor, but also a heavy responsibility. The bread is expected to be flawless, crusty yet soft, aromatic, and fresh from the oven at just the right moment. With practiced hands, the baker shapes the dough into rounds and loaves, lining them carefully on wooden boards. The hearth's heat is steady and strong, the coals glowing bright. Time is counted not by clocks, which were rare, but by the feel of heat, the scent in the air, and the color of the crust. But amid the early morning rush, perhaps a fleeting distraction, a stray ember falling, or a moment's lapse in attention, the loaves are left too long by the fire. When finally pulled from the oven, their crusts are blackened, hard, and bitter, giving off a sharp scent of scorched flour and burnt wood. Though the baker quickly offers fresh bread, prepared anew with trembling hands, the shadow of the earlier mistake lingers. The scent of burnt dough pervades the banquet hall, subtle yet unmistakable. Guests wrinkle their noses, whisper quietly, and glance suspiciously toward the oven. The noble steward, tasked with ensuring perfection, frowns. In a society where food was more than sustenance, where it was a symbol of wealth, care, and status, such a misstep could carry weighty consequences. Bread was central to every meal, and especially to grand feasts. It was a staple as well as a statement. To burn it was to threaten not just the meal, but the reputation of those who provided it. Over the coming weeks, the baker noticed the change. Villagers and travelers alike began choosing other ovens. Their voices carried murmurs of doubt. If his bread burns once, what else might he overlook? Better to be safe and buy from the miller's wife down the lane. Such whispered judgments were powerful, shaping the fate of small businesses. The baker's pride was bruised, yet he did not complain. In medieval villages, reputation could be as fragile as freshly baked bread. Recovery was slow, and forgiveness often reluctant. Without modern advertising or guarantees, trust was built on consistency, daily proof in simple acts, turning dough, watching coals, pulling bread at just the right moment. But the baker's story was not just one of failure. It reflects the delicate balance between skill and chance in daily life centuries ago. Fire, essential for cooking and warmth, was also unpredictable. A gust of wind, a misjudged ember, or a brief distraction could ruin hours of work. In a world without ovens controlled by thermostats, such risks were part of the rhythm. His experience also speaks to broader social dynamics. Nobles depended on servants and craftsmen to uphold their status. A feast was a performance, with every detail scrutinized. Yet the pressure on humble tradespeople was immense, their livelihoods often resting on moments they could neither fully control nor predict. Though he lost patrons, the baker's hands remained skilled. He rose early each day, tending the hearth, measuring ingredients with care, and slowly regaining trust. Some say he learned to bake bread sweeter and richer than before, perhaps in an effort to make amends through flavor and devotion. Others whisper that the burnt bread taught the village a lesson in patience and humility, reminders that perfection is rare and that even the simplest things require grace under pressure. No matter how the story ended, the baker's burnt loaves remain a quiet echo from the past. A scent, a memory, a lesson carried on the wind from a small stone bakery, where dawn light met the stubborn, smoky taste of human imperfection. So when you think of history, not only grand events or famous names, but the daily struggles hidden in kitchens and hearths, remember him. The baker who burned the bread meant for a feast, whose mistake filled a hall with scent and silence, and whose story reminds us all of the fragile balance between craft, chance, and the human heart. The midwife who arrived late to a birth, imagine a narrow road winding through a patchwork of fields, the earth soft with autumn rain. The sky hangs low and gray, promising more storms. Each step along the path is a careful negotiation with the mud, which clings to boots and hems, slowing progress to a deliberate, measured pace. In the distance, a small cottage waits, its chimney just visible beyond a stand of alder trees. The woman making her way there is a midwife, her basket packed with linen, herbs, and the practiced confidence of years. But today, even her experience is tested by the weather's stubbornness. Midwives in medieval Europe were called at all hours. Their arrival meant the difference between anxiety and hope, between the chaos of birth and the comfort of practiced hands. Some lived close to the families they served. Others traveled miles in the dark, through rain and snow, often guided only by the faint glow of a lantern or the desperate shouts of a messenger. On this night, a sudden downpour caught the midwife far from her destination. Roads turned to slurry, cart ruts filled with water, and the familiar shortcut across the meadow became a small river in itself. She pressed on, pausing to hitch her skirts and steady her breath. The rain blurred landmarks, and every familiar turning seemed strange. The sound of her own steps disappeared beneath the steady drumming on leaves and thatch. Time, too, grew uncertain, measured now only by the aching cold in her hands and the growing urgency in her heart. Earth waits for no one, but she did not let herself hurry. She knew from experience that a twisted ankle or lost footing could delay her even more. When at last she reached the cottage, the storm was already easing. Her knock was answered by a neighbor, who led her inside with a glance that held both relief and disappointment. In the main room, the fire burned low. A new child had already arrived, swaddled and wailing, held close to the mother's chest. The father stood nearby, pale but smiling, uncertain how to meet the midwife's gaze. The air was thick with the sense of smoke, damp wool, and the metallic tang of afterbirth. The midwife's skills were not needed tonight. She checked mother and child, finding both healthy, strong pulse, clear eyes, the faintest flush of exertion in their cheeks. Yet, as she worked, she felt the unspoken words pressing in from all sides. The mother whispered, almost to herself, that the midwife had failed her duty. The words were not shouted or repeated, but they lingered in the hush that followed, coloring every glance, every awkward silence, every careful question. In the world of medieval childbirth, the midwife was a figure both trusted and vulnerable. She was called upon in moments of greatest need and uncertainty, her presence seen as protection against danger. Yet her position was always precarious, balanced between gratitude and suspicion, between the relief of a safe delivery and the accusation that followed even the smallest misstep. The success or failure of a birth, so often determined by chance, weather, or the strength of the mother, could shadow a reputation for years. The midwife stayed through the night, preparing warming teas and tending the hearth. She did her work with quiet diligence, speaking little but watching closely for signs of fever or distress. She knew that, for now, her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. In the morning, she gathered her things, thanked the family, and stepped once more into the road, boots heavy with mud and mind burdened by the memory of the mother's quiet words. News in small communities traveled as steadily as the river. In the weeks that followed, she felt the difference. Doors opened more slowly. Requests for her help came less often, sometimes relayed through a neighbor rather than delivered in person. The sense of belonging, never guaranteed for those who served on the boundaries of life and death, grew fainter. Some mothers still called her, trusting her experience and calm. Others hesitated, remembering the story of the birth she had missed. There were no formal records for midwives in her era, no written praise, no official blame. Reputations rested on stories, carried in whispers from one hearth to another. The midwife understood this. She continued her rounds, tending wounds, preparing herbs, and waiting beside many bedsides as new lives entered the world. Yet each time she hurried along a muddy road or watched storm clouds gather, she felt the weight of that quiet accusation, the sense that, despite her skill and years of service, she could never truly escape the shadow of a single missed moment. And so her life became a study in patience, humility, and endurance. She learned to measure her worth not in words spoken behind closed doors, but in the hands she steadied, the fevers she soothed, and the quiet prayers she offered as dawn crept across the fields. The world rarely remembers such stories in detail, but for those who walk the boundary between hope and risk, the memory of a single late arrival can linger far longer than any praise. The steward who lost the keys to the cellar. Imagine yourself in a great hall, the walls thick with the sense of roasting meats, freshly baked bread, and the faint, earthy trace of aging wine seeping from the cool stones below. Lanterns flicker along long wooden tables, their light dancing over the silvered platters and the carved beams of the ceiling. The room is full of voices, some raised in laughter, some lowered in the gentle hush of evening conversation. In one quiet corner, half hidden by a linen-draped trestle table, stands the steward, his hands moving methodically from tunic to pouch, from pocket to belt. Tonight, the manor is crowded. Guests have arrived from distant villages, drawn by a celebration, perhaps a wedding, a feast marking the change of seasons, or the arrival of an important visitor. The air hums with anticipation and the echo of footfalls as servants dart in and out, arms laden with dishes and jugs. At the heart of this delicate operation stands the steward, not lord nor servant, but something in between. He holds the keys, quite literally, to the workings of the household. These keys, worn brass, heavy with use, each etched with a notch or symbol, hang from a ring that rarely leaves his side. One opens the storeroom where sacks of grain are kept away from mice and moisture. Another turns the lock to the buttery, where wheels of cheese and barrels of ale rest in the dark. The most important, perhaps, is the key to the wine cellar, a place both sacred and forbidden, cool and dim and lined with bottles aging in silence. But tonight, as the first round of toasts is called for, the steward's hand closes on an empty loop. The geese, his constant companions, are missing. It is a small thing, the loss of a ring of keys, but in the ordered world of a medieval estate, it is a quiet calamity. Without the keys, the rhythm of the evening falters. Wine cannot be drawn, nor bread fetched from the locked larder. The kitchen staff murmur among themselves. A maid searches her apron, certain she saw them near the ovens. In the hall, guests become aware that something is amiss. The steward moves quietly from table to table, asking gentle questions, retracing his steps, his brow furrowed in careful thought. For hours, the search continues. He stoops to peer under benches, feeling for cold metal among the rushes scattered across the floor. He questions the youngest servants, careful not to let worry sharpen his tone. The lord's eldest son offers to help, turning over platters and lifting discarded cloaks. Still, the keys are nowhere to be found. Imagine the discomfort that settles like a cool draft along the floor. The guests, deprived of their wine, grow restless. Whispers circulate about the steward's absent-mindedness, about the peculiarities of last year's feast, about other small mishaps that had faded from memory but now rise again. In a world where reputation is built slowly and lost in an instant, a single mistake can echo for years. Keys, in the medieval world, were more than simple tools. They symbolized trust, authority, and the invisible boundaries between the household's public face and its private workings. A steward was chosen not just for his ability to balance accounts, but for his reliability and discretion. Losing the keys was a breach of invisible contract, a momentary unraveling of the quiet order that kept manor life steady. As the evening deepens, the search begins to feel hopeless. The steward sits at the edge of the hall, tracing the memory of each step he took since dawn. The sounds of revelry have faded into soft conversation, and a hush has settled over the tables. The servants, too, are subdued, their tasks slowed by uncertainty. Even the fire burns lower, its light softer and more uncertain. Finally, near midnight, a page boy bending to gather dropped napkins reaches beneath a long bench and feels the cold ring of metal. With a murmur, he lifts the keys, heavy and unmistakable, into the candlelight. Relief passes through the room almost invisibly, a gentle ripple that stirs the stillness, restoring the quiet machinery of the night. The wine flows again, though more quietly, and the feast resumes its gentle pace. Yet, though the crisis has passed, the story does not end with the finding of the keys. In the days and years that follow, the tale of the lost keys will be retold, first in jest, then as a lesson. Children of the house will whisper about the steward's blunder, embellishing the tale with imagined details. Guests who had been present will remember the pause in the evening, the sensation of uncertainty, the subtle tension that drew everyone together, if only for a moment. The steward himself will become a figure in the household's quiet folklore, not disgraced but marked, his reliability now tinged with a trace of human fallibility. He will check his keys more often, fingers tracing each notch before he sets out for the day. Servants will watch him with a blend of sympathy and amusement, knowing how easily order gives way to confusion, how one moment's lapse can ripple forward in memory. And so, the hall will remain, filled again with laughter, music, and the familiar tap of cups on the table. But somewhere, beneath the surface, the memory of lost keys lingers, a quiet reminder of the precariousness of order and of the small, almost invisible moments that shape the stories people remember. Imagine yourself drifting in the dimming light, the fire's glow soft on your face, the scent of wine and bread and cool stone lingering in the air. The feast has ended, but the story remains, a gentle, persistent echo, weaving its way through the quiet rhythm of lives long past. The mason who dropped a stone during construction. Imagine a rising stone wall under the steady light of an overcast day. The air smells faintly of damp lime and fresh mortar. Wooden scaffolding creaks softly as masons, dressed in rough-spun tunics, move carefully along its planks. Each stone is heavy, shaped by hand, placed with care. The rhythm of their work is slow and deliberate, a steady beat echoed in the tapping of chisels and the scraping of tools. Among them is a mason whose hands have grown calloused and sure from years of lifting and shaping stone. His eyes focus on the next block, a large limestone piece cut precisely for its place in the wall. He lifts it, balancing its weight with practiced ease. But then a slip. The stone shifts unexpectedly, slipping from his grasp. It falls. The heavy block strikes the wooden scaffold below and cracks in two with a dull, resonant sound. The echo halts work for a moment. No one is hurt, but the disruption carries weight beyond the broken stone. The overseer, a stern man with a weathered face and eyes that miss nothing, approaches. His expression tightens as he surveys the cracked block. He mutters something low, a warning, an ill omen. In medieval times, such accidents were often read as signs, not just mishaps. A dropped stone could foreshadow ruin or misfortune if not addressed. Whispers ripple among the masons. The man whose hands failed him is watched with new suspicion. Fellow workers, who once exchanged nods of respect, now cast wary glances. Quiet doubts form like cracks beneath the surface. His skill, once assumed, becomes questioned. Word spreads slowly beyond the site. In small towns and villages, news travels on the wind. The mason who dropped the stone, a phrase that quickly becomes a mark. Craftsmen depended not only on skill but also on reputation. Trust was as essential as tools or training. Yet the mason himself carries the weight of the mistake more heavily than the broken stone. His confidence may waver. Every lift becomes more cautious, every placement more hesitant. And the eyes watching him feel sharper than ever. Construction in the medieval period was a laborious and uncertain task. Builders balanced immense weights without modern machinery. Mistakes could mean delays, expense, or even danger. And while accidents were common, the social consequences were real. To lose trust on a worksite could mean fewer commissions, less work, and diminished standing. A craftsman's livelihood depended as much on community opinion as on his ability to lay stone or carve wood. This story, small as it seems, reveals the delicate balance of medieval labor and social life. The physical act of dropping a stone echoes with metaphor of human error, consequence, and the silent judgments that shaped everyday existence. So now, if you imagine that scaffold once more, the smell of mortar, the rough texture of stone, the quiet murmurs of work paused, hear the soft thud of a block breaking. See the mason's hands, unsure for a moment, and the watchful eyes of his peers. And in that moment, understand how history is not only made by great events but also by small fractures of trust and the human stories behind them. The weaver who measured a length of cloth too short. Imagine yourself standing in a bustling medieval market, the air thick with scents of damp earth, freshly woven wool, and the sharp tang of tanned leather. Around you, merchants shout prices, children dart between stalls, and bolts of cloth flap gently in the autumn breeze. This was the rhythm of daily life in towns and villages across England during the late Middle Ages, a world where trade was woven into the very fabric of society. Among the many trades, weaving was one of the most vital and respected crafts. A skilled weaver's hands transformed raw wool or flax into lengths of cloth that would clothe nobles and peasants alike. Precision mattered. The length of cloth was measured carefully to ensure fair trade and reputation. But sometimes, even in the most careful hands, errors or misjudgments were made. This is the story of a weaver, a craftsman whose name is lost, but whose misstep was remembered in local market lore. He had been commissioned by a noblewoman, known in records simply as Lady Margaret of a nearby manor, to produce a length of fine woolen cloth. The agreement was clear: a set measure, enough to drape a gown with room to spare, woven to her exact specifications. The weaver set to work in his workshop, surrounded by the steady clack of looms and the scent of spun fibers. After days of labor, he presented the cloth, rolled and tied with a ribbon, to be delivered to Lady Margaret's estate. On the surface, it was a fine piece, rich in color and texture, reflecting the quality the noblewoman expected. But when Lady Margaret unrolled the cloth in the privacy of her solar, her fingers traced along the length with growing unease. The fabric was shorter than agreed, by a hand's width. Not a great deal by measure, but enough to disrupt the fit of a garment carefully planned. She called the weaver to account. The weaver apologized. He explained that measuring lengths by hand and eye was not always exact, that the difference was unintentional. He even offered to weave an additional piece at no charge to make up for the shortfall. But Lady Margaret would hear none of it. She accused him of deliberate deception, a slight to her honor and status. In medieval society, honor was currency as valuable as gold. A noblewoman's reputation could be fragile, and any hint of being cheated could ripple through court and market alike. Word spread swiftly through the market town. Whispers began that the weaver could not be trusted, that his measures were unreliable. Buyers hesitated. The weaver tried to defend his name, but in a world reliant on trust and reputation, the damage was done. Over time, his commissions declined. Loyal customers turned elsewhere, wary of the tale that had settled like dust in every corner of the market. The marketplace itself was a place of contrast, noise and negotiation, but also of delicate social balancing. Weavers, like many craftspeople, depended on repeat business and good word. A single misstep could unravel years of work. This weaver story is not unique, but it echoes a universal truth, that the interplay of craft, commerce, and social standing could be as fragile as the threads in the cloth he wove. Imagine the weaver's workshop, beams darkened by age, sunlight filtering through small windows, the loom's rhythmic clatter filling the air. Each thread stretched tight, a testament to skill. Yet, in the end, the difference of a few inches was enough to alter the course of a life. The noblewoman's rejection was also a reflection of the era's strict social hierarchies. To accuse a craftsman of dishonesty was a way of asserting status, drawing lines between those who made and those who commanded. The weaver was caught not only in the measure of cloth but in the measure of power. This story serves as a quiet window into medieval daily life. How simple errors carried weight beyond their scale, how honor could be defended fiercely, and how survival in the marketplace depended as much on perception as on skill. In the end, the weaver's fate reminds us of the delicate balance behind every transaction, the human elements woven through the commerce of a world far removed from our own. It is a reminder that behind every bolt of cloth lies a story, not just of fiber and dye, but of trust, pride, and the fragile threads that hold communities together. The herald who misread a family's lineage at a ceremony, imagine a grand hall filled with flickering candlelight, its high-timbered ceilings shadowed and echoing. Nobles clad in embroidered silks and velvet gather beneath banners bearing intricate coats of arms, their faces attentive yet expectant. At the center stands the herald, cloaked in vibrant colors, holding parchment that bears the histories and honors of the families present. Today is a day of ceremony, a moment when status, loyalty, and lineage are celebrated with solemn words and ritual. The herald's role is crucial, to read aloud the genealogies, to confirm alliances, and to remind all assembled of the ancient ties that bind them. His voice carries authority, shaped by tradition and years of practice. But on this occasion, something goes wrong. As the herald unfolds the scroll and begins to proclaim the lineage of one noble family, he mistakenly recites a line that does not belong, a claim of ancestry that is false, invented, or simply misread. Perhaps the scribe's error muddled the names. Perhaps the herald misremembered a detail. Whatever the cause, the declaration is clear and incorrect. The assembled nobles are quick to notice. A murmur ripples through the hall, then a ripple of laughter, light at first, but growing in volume. Whispers spread like wildfire, a mistake so glaring could not be overlooked. Though someone steps forward to correct the record immediately, the damage has been done. The herald's voice falters briefly, but he carries on. Yet in the eyes of those present, his credibility wavers. From that day forward, his once respected announcements are met with skepticism. When he speaks, some raise their brows or exchange knowing glances. His name becomes linked with that moment of misreading, a reminder that even the keepers of tradition can falter. In medieval society, lineage was everything. Family histories determined marriages, inheritances, titles, and alliances. A single word could enhance or diminish a house's standing. Heralds held a sacred trust to convey these truths precisely. Their proclamations were not mere formality, they shaped the social fabric. Mistakes by heralds were rare but impactful. A misread name could spark confusion, ignite rivalries, or invite ridicule. Nobles guarded their genealogies fiercely, commissioning chroniclers and genealogists to maintain accurate records. The herald's error disrupted this delicate balance. Beyond the immediate embarrassment, the herald faced real consequences. Loss of trust meant fewer invitations to court events, reduced influence, and a tarnished reputation among peers. In a role where voice was power, silence or doubt was a subtle form of exile. Yet, this story is more than a cautionary tale about error. It reflects the immense pressures faced by medieval officials, the fragility of oral and written tradition, and the human side of ceremony. Despite careful preparation, all were fallible. The error also became a source of gossip and humor, stories passed quietly in corridors and taverns. It was said that even children recited the herald's blunder as a joke, reminding the powerful that authority could slip like sand through fingers. Still, the herald continued his duties, perhaps more carefully, perhaps resigned. His mistake was recorded alongside his name, an indelible mark in the chronicles of the noble court. And yet, life moved on. New heralds rose, families expanded, and the ceremonies continued, each bearing the weight of history and the risk of human error. So when you think of the past, not only in triumphs and tragedies, but in small, human moments, remember him. The herald who misread a family's lineage at a ceremony, whose voice faltered beneath flickering candles, and whose story reminds us that even the keepers of history walk a delicate line between truth and mistake. The innkeeper who confused two guests' accounts. Imagine a dimly lit common room at the end of a long road, where travelers shed their burdens and trade quiet stories over bowls of stew. The air is thick with the mingled scents of roasting onions, damp wool, and the faint tang of ale. At the heart of this scene stands the innkeeper, a man accustomed to balancing countless small details, from the comfort of guests to the careful management of coin and supplies. His ledgers are well thumbed, his memory trusted by regulars and strangers alike. The medieval inn was more than a place to sleep. For the traveler, it was a rare refuge of warmth, shelter, and news from far away. For the villagers, the inn's comings and goings marked the rhythm of outside life. Peddlers, pilgrims, tradesmen, and occasionally, more mysterious visitors. The innkeeper's role was part host, part accountant, and part quiet observer. Every evening brought new arrivals and new names to remember. On this particular evening, rain pattered against the windows, blurring the lamplight and encouraging guests to linger. Two men arrived within an hour of each other, both tired, both cloaked against the chill. The first was a merchant, the second a minor official. Their names, similar enough in sound, were given quickly as the innkeeper welcomed them and ushered them toward the fire. He made a mental note to record their payments after supper, trusting in his routine. But even the most attentive routines can be undone by distraction. The kitchen was busier than usual that night. A spilled cask, a late delivery of bread, a minor disagreement among the staff. By the time the innkeeper sat down with his ledger, his mind was already divided. He entered the merchant's payment under the official's name, and the official's under the merchant's. A simple error, almost invisible among the day's many small tasks. The mistake only revealed itself the next morning, as the guests prepared to depart. The merchant, rising early, asked for his receipt and prepared to leave. The official, slower to rise, finished his breakfast before settling his account. When the innkeeper requested payment from the official, the man protested. He had already paid, and he would not pay twice. The merchant, now far down the road, could not be questioned. The innkeeper, flustered, produced his ledger. There, in neat script, was the wrong name beside the payment. The official's refusal grew firmer. The innkeeper's embarrassment deepened. In medieval society, reputation was often built on the smallest details. An innkeeper's honesty and efficiency mattered as much as the warmth of his hearth. When word of the confusion spread, first among staff, then among locals who stopped in for ale, the story began to shift in the telling. Some claimed the official had tried to cheat the innkeeper. Others whispered that the innkeeper was growing careless, perhaps even senile. The truth, as it so often is, lay somewhere in between. A moment's inattention, a scribbled line, and the stubborn insistence of memory over fact. The official eventually agreed to settle the bill, but not without complaint. The debt was paid, the ledger corrected, and a brief letter was sent after the merchant to clarify the confusion. No real harm was done, no law was broken, no fortunes lost. Yet the incident lingered. For weeks afterward, neighbors would ask, with a wry smile, whether their names had been recorded correctly. Regulars teased the innkeeper gently, and every new guest was greeted with a joke about double-checking the books. The medieval inn was a place of constant negotiation, of trust, misunderstanding, and gentle humor. Errors, even small ones, could ripple through a community, coloring opinions and shaping reputations for years. The innkeeper, for his part, responded with humility. He reviewed his records more carefully. He listened more closely to each name and repeated it back, spelling it out if needed. But he could never quite escape the memory of that night, the feeling of uncertainty as two nearly identical names blurred together on the page. History rarely pauses for such incidents. Ledgers are rewritten, debts repaid, and daily routines resume. But for those who lived through them, the memory of confusion could last far longer than the resolution. In the years to come, travelers still came to the inn, warming themselves by the fire and sharing stories of distant roads. Some would ask about the old scandal, and the innkeeper, smiling quietly, would admit to his mistake. It became a gentle cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most careful among us can lose track, and that reputation, once marked by error, is slow to fade. And so the story lived on, softer than scandal, lighter than true shame. A quiet shadow on the ledger, and a memory shared long after the pages themselves had worn thin. The carter who delivered goods to the wrong manor. Imagine yourself on a rutted country road at first light, the cool air still damp from last night's mist. In the gentle hush of dawn, the only sound is the steady creak of a cart's wooden wheels and the low, rhythmic plod of a workhorse. The carter sits atop the grain sacks, his cloak pulled tight against the chill. He is used to these mornings, roads edged with wildflowers in summer, stubble and pale frost in autumn, the smell of fresh hay giving way to the scent of distant wood smoke. His work, though rarely celebrated, is essential to the rhythm of medieval life. Carters ferry goods from manor to village, from mill to bakehouse, connecting fields to tables and market stalls. Their days are measured not by hours, but by miles and by loads. Wheat or barley, timber or stone, sometimes salted fish packed tightly in barrels. The trust of stewards and merchants is his greatest asset, as fragile and carefully maintained as the harness of his horse. On this particular morning, the cart is laden with grain, perhaps enough to see a small household through the coming winter. The sacks are tied neatly, marked with chalk or a dab of wax. The carter's instructions are clear. Deliver to the manor on the far side of the stream, the one with the tall hedge and the weathered stone gate. He has been there before. The housekeeper's dog always greets him with a low bark. The kitchen boys call out as he passes, hoping for a handful of spilled grain. But this morning, the road feels unfamiliar. A new track has been cut through the field, and the old signpost leans drunkenly, its painted letters nearly worn away. Distracted by the morning fog and a sleepless night, the carter takes the wrong fork in the lane. Soon, the stone walls on either side look familiar, but only just. He passes under an archway that is nearly, but not quite, the one he remembers. He arrives at the gate, calls out, and is answered by a steward who appears impatient, already tallying supplies on a wax tablet. The carter unloads the sacks, checks the tally, and departs, eager to finish his work. Only later, When a scullion from the kitchen recognizes the crest stamped into the flour sacks, does the mistake become clear? This is the wrong manner. The grain does not belong here. When the error is discovered, the carter returns at once, apologizing as he reloads the cart. The sacks are heavy, and now a small crowd gathers, curious workers, stable boys, even a few villagers drawn by the commotion. The steward, responsible for the manor's accounts, is stern. He insists on a penalty for the delay. Time, after all, is measured in meals served, in bread baked, in the expectations of a lord who demands punctuality. The carter's mistake means meals will be late, perhaps even disrupted. In medieval society, reputation is currency. News of mistakes travels quickly, along with rumors and exaggerations. Other clients, stewards from neighboring manors, merchants who depend on reliable delivery, take note. They remember the slip, however minor, and mark it quietly in their mental ledgers. The carter, who once took pride in his steady hand and unbroken record, now finds his work changed in small, persistent ways. Fewer contracts are offered. The best routes are given to others. Even familiar faces seem more distant, their trust withheld. For a carter, the tools of the trade are simple: a well-made cart, a sturdy horse, and a reputation for reliability. The roads themselves are unpredictable, muddy in spring, frozen in winter, sometimes blocked by fallen branches or travelers with claims of higher purpose. Mistakes are inevitable, yet the world seldom forgives them entirely. A single error, however quickly corrected, can shape the memory of a community for years to come. The manor house itself sits quiet once the day's excitement passes. The kitchen returns to its routines, flour dust swirling in the morning light. The steward records the incident, perhaps as a lesson for others. "Let the carters mind their road," he might write, "for delay is costly." The carter, meanwhile, sets out again, his cart now lighter, his mood heavy. Each jolt of the wheels reminds him of the eyes that watched, the contracts that slipped quietly away. Yet even in disappointment, the rhythms of daily life persist. The horse still needs feeding, the harness repairing. Roads must be traveled, goods delivered. The carter learns to watch the signposts more closely, to ask directions twice instead of trusting to memory. He becomes more cautious, more deliberate. With time, some clients return, perhaps forgiving or simply needing his services again. Others do not. History does not remember his name. The manor's ledgers record only the grain delivered, the penalty paid, the lateness noted. But in the quiet corners of the village, the story endures, told by firelight, retold by apprentices learning the trade. It is not a tale of disaster, nor one of heroism, but of the delicate, ever-shifting balance of trust in a world where so much depended on the steady hand of a single, unseen worker. So, as the sun sets and the day's work is done, imagine the carter resting by his cart beneath a wide, starlit sky. The scent of cut hay lingers in the air, mingling with the soft sound of horses cropping grass. There are fewer contracts now, but still, the road calls. The world is vast, and even the smallest error can echo through it for years. Yet life, as always, moves quietly onward, one careful mile at a time. The miller who let the millstone grind too long. Imagine yourself on the edge of a quiet village, where a gentle river curves lazily beneath a wooden watermill. The wheel turns slowly, creaking and splashing as it channels the flowing water to power the grinding stones inside. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and freshly cut grain, mingling with a faint whiff of dust and wood smoke from nearby hearths. This mill, a vital heartbeat of the village, transforms golden kernels into the flour that will feed many. Inside, a miller tends the stones with practiced care. His hands move with the rhythm of years spent guiding grain into the grinding trough, watching as the meal emerges fine and pale. The grinding wheel emits a steady, low hum, a sound that blends with the rustling fields beyond and the murmurs of villagers going about their day. But one afternoon, amid the familiar sounds and scents, the miller's attention falters. Perhaps distracted by a visitor at the door, or caught in the thoughts of an unsettled season ahead, he delays turning the wheel off when the grain has finished grinding. The stone continues to turn, grinding not just grain but the meal itself, slowly heating the flour beneath. When the villagers return to collect their share, they notice a change. The flour, once soft and pale, carries a sharp bitterness. Baked bread made from it tastes scorched, its familiar comfort replaced by a lingering unpleasantness. Some suspect the grain was poor, others wonder if the mill has lost its edge. Whispers begin to spread through the village like a slow breeze. The miller is growing careless, they say. His hands are no longer steady. Even when he replaces the flawed meal, offering fresh flour without charge, the doubt lingers. The bitterness remains, not in the flour, but in the minds of those who once trusted him. The miller is not an uncommon figure in medieval life. Mills were essential, transforming harvests into sustenance. Their operation required skill and constant attention. Water levels shifted, stones wore down, and grain varied in quality. The miller was responsible not only for the machinery but for the livelihood of many families. Mistakes could ripple far beyond the mill. A spoiled batch of flour could spoil meals and provoke anxiety in a community that often lived on the edge of scarcity. Trust in the miller was trust in the safety of daily bread, a foundation both practical and symbolic. This incident reveals the delicate balance of medieval trade and reputation. Without formal regulations or recourse, millers depended heavily on the goodwill of their neighbors. Their craft was visible but also vulnerable. A moment's lapse, a single failure, could stain a lifetime of honest work. Yet life at the mill was not only a sequence of successes and failures. It was also a rhythm punctuated by the seasons, harvest festivals, dry summers, harsh winters. The miller's days were long, marked by the ceaseless turning of stones and the steady flow of grain. It was a task both physical and contemplative, involving the fine judgment of when to start, when to stop, and how to care for the equipment that bridged the natural world and human need. The villagers, for their part, carried their own anxieties. Hunger was never far. A poor crop, an early frost, or a pestilence could turn the entire community's fortunes upside down. Flour was not just a commodity, it was a measure of security and survival. In the backdrop of this quiet drama, the mill itself stands as a symbol of continuity. Its turning wheel echoes the passage of time, a constant in a world often uncertain. And even as doubts shadow the miller's skill, the mill continues to turn, grinding grain that will rise in ovens to feed hungry mouths. So now, imagine once again the water wheel turning beneath the autumn sky, the scent of earth and grain thick in the air, the miller's hands steadying the stones. Feel the quiet tension between trust and doubt, the weight of small mistakes that carry large consequences. And in that gentle rhythm, find the story not only of a man and his millstone but of a community bound together by bread and belief. The monk who mistranslated a passage of scripture. Imagine yourself seated in a dim monastery chamber, the only light coming from a flickering oil lamp perched beside a cluttered wooden desk. The air is thick with the faint scent of parchment, beeswax, and aged wood. Outside, the wind hums softly through narrow arched windows, rustling the tapestries that hang heavy on stone walls. This is the scriptorium, a sacred place where monks devote their days and nights to the careful copying and interpretation of scripture. Among those monks was one who, by the flicker of that lamp, labored late into the night over a particular passage of sacred text. His hand moved steadily, but the weight of responsibility was heavy. The scripture he copied was a vital piece. Words meant not only to convey divine truth but to guide the souls of those who read and heard it. Yet, in the quiet focus required for such work, a single word slipped. It was not a missing letter or an illegible mark, but a mistranslation, a subtle misplacement of a term that shifted meaning just enough to cause alarm. Instead of peace, the verse read peril. Instead of salvation, it suggested destruction. The change was small in letters but vast in consequence. When the passage was read aloud during morning prayers, murmurs spread quickly through the cloister. Some monks recoiled. Others whispered among themselves. In an era when heresy was feared not only for spiritual reasons but for its potential to fracture communities, even a small error could ignite suspicion. The abbot, a stern man known for his dedication to orthodoxy, summoned the monk. Though the scribe explained it had been an honest mistake, a moment's slip born of fatigue and the difficulties of translation between Latin and Old English, the stain on his reputation lingered. He was ordered to correct the text immediately. Hours were spent rewriting, erasing, and recopying under watchful eyes. The corrected passage was to be distributed, and the error officially declared unintentional. But the damage was not so easily undone. In the quiet halls and cloisters, whispers followed the monk. Some suggested carelessness. Others feared a subtle inclination toward forbidden teachings. His prayers, once received without question, were now viewed through a lens of doubt. His robe, once a symbol of sanctity, felt heavier with suspicion. In medieval monastic life, the act of copying scripture was both sacred and exacting. The monks were the guardians of knowledge, the transmitters of divine word. Every letter held meaning, every phrase carried the potential to shape belief. Errors were feared because they could lead to misunderstanding, schism, or worse, accusations of heresy. This incident highlights the fragile balance between human fallibility and religious authority. The monk's mistake was not unique. Errors crept into manuscripts through centuries of hand copying, but the social and spiritual consequences were deeply felt by those involved. One can imagine the monk in solitude after the incident, the flickering lamp casting long shadows as he revisited his work, each stroke tinged with anxiety. Perhaps he prayed for forgiveness, for understanding, for a restoration of trust. Yet, the echoes of suspicion are slow to fade. His story serves as a quiet reminder of the complexities behind the texts that have shaped history. Behind every manuscript lies a human hand, subject to error, fatigue, and doubt. And behind every act of faith lies a tension between perfection and imperfection. Though the mistranslation was corrected, the monk's journey was forever shadowed, not by heresy, but by the fragile nature of trust within the sacred walls he called home. The smith who overlooked a crack in a blade, imagine the steady rhythm of hammers striking anvil in a dimly lit forge. The air is thick with the scent of heated metal and charcoal smoke, mingling with the faint tang of sweat from the smith's brow. Flickering flames cast warm amber shadows on stone walls lined with tools of every shape and purpose. In this space, skill and patience meet to transform raw iron into objects of strength and beauty. Among the many craftsmen who worked these forges, the smith held a special place. His hands shaped the weapons and tools that sustained life, defended homes, and made history. Swords in particular were more than mere metal. They were symbols of honor, status, and power. A well-forged blade might serve a noble for decades. A flaw could be fatal. Our story centers on one such smith, known in his village and beyond for his craftsmanship. His blades were prized for their balance and resilience. Clients ranged from farmers needing sturdy sickles to knights demanding the finest swords for battle or practice. On one particular day, the smith completed a sword destined for a nobleman's household. The blade gleamed, a careful temper giving it a subtle sheen under the workshop's flickering light. It was lighter than many, yet strong, promising speed and precision in equal measure. Weeks later, during a training session in the noble's courtyard, the sword failed. As the noble practiced strikes with a companion, the blade suddenly cracked. A sharp sound, a faint, high-pitched snap, cut through the steady rhythm of blows. The noble's grip faltered as the sword split near the hilt, the cracked section catching light before the weapon was set aside. The smith, summoned immediately, could do nothing but bow in apology. The crack had been invisible to the eye, a small fissure hidden beneath the polished surface. Perhaps a minute impurity in the iron, or a tiny error in the quenching process. Factors beyond certainty even for the most skilled hands. Yet the consequences were clear. Rumors began to circulate quickly, whispers that the smith had been careless, that he had rushed his work, that his once reliable blades could no longer be trusted. In a society where reputation was as sharp as a blade itself, this shadow was dangerous. Clients hesitated. Word spread beyond the noble's estate to nearby villages and towns. Other smiths, eager for business, quietly emphasized their own reliability, contrasting it with the tale of the cracked sword. The smith, whose hands had once been celebrated, now found his voice met with doubt. It's important to understand the context of such incidents. Medieval metallurgy was as much art as science, and the quality of iron could vary wildly depending on source and smelting technique. The smith's work was vulnerable to variables outside his control: the purity of the ore, the consistency of the forge's heat, the timing of quenching in water or oil. Even the most experienced smiths accepted that failure was a possibility. They tested blades with strikes and bends, but some flaws only revealed themselves under prolonged use or unexpected stress. That a noble's sword cracked during practice was unfortunate but not unheard of. Nonetheless, the social impact was significant. The smith's standing was tied not just to skill but to trust. A blade was a companion in battle, a safeguard of honor. To question the maker's care was to question his very worth. Despite this, the smith continued his craft. He returned each day to the forge, tending flames and folding metal with renewed care. Perhaps the cracked sword taught him humility, or served as a reminder that perfection is an elusive goal. His later works showed meticulous attention to detail, each blade tempered with extra care, each edge polished to gleaming sharpness. But some damage to reputation lingers long after the crack is repaired. His name became linked to the incident in tavern tales and market gossip, a symbol of fallibility in a world that demanded excellence. This story also invites reflection on the nature of craft and consequence. Every profession holds risks of error. Every trade carries a burden of trust. The smith's crack was small and unseen but echoed widely, shaping his life in ways that even his finest blades could not undo. Beyond the forge and the sword, it reminds us that history is woven not only from triumphs but from quiet moments of imperfection, where human skill meets chance, and where reputation balances delicately on the edge of a single mistake. So when you picture the past, not only in grand battles or towering castles, but in the rhythm of daily life, imagine him, the smith who overlooked a crack in a blade, whose apology was humble, and whose story unfolds in the subtle interplay of fire, metal, and trust. The apothecary who confused two bundles of herbs. Imagine the hush of a medieval apothecary's shop at dusk. Shelves line the walls, each stacked with glass jars and cloth-wrapped bundles. The air is thick with the scent of dried lavender, sage, and the faint bitterness of ground roots. In this dim space, light filters through a single, narrow window, catching on motes of dust that drift lazily in the stillness. At the counter stands the apothecary, his apron dusted with the pale residue of ground chalk and powdered bark, his hands practiced but not immune to fatigue. The apothecary is a fixture in the town, a trusted figure, consulted by young and old alike. His day begins before dawn, measuring, mixing, and listening to the complaints and ailments of his neighbors. Each herb, root, and petal in his collection carries its own stories, some for fever, others for cough, still others for aches of the heart or pangs of the mind. In a world where physicians are few and travel slowly, it is the apothecary who stands at the crossroads of health and hope. But this evening, as the sun drops behind the rooftops, his mind is cluttered with the small confusions of a busy week. Two clients wait, one a young woman seeking relief for a sleepless child, the other an older man requesting a tonic for aching joints. The apothecary moves between the shelves, reciting names under his breath: valerian for sleep, comfrey for pain, chamomile for comfort. On the counter, two nearly identical bundles rest side by side, their twine ties the only thing distinguishing them in the dim light. He turns away for a moment, distracted by a knock at the back door, a neighbor seeking advice about the weather and whether the roads will be passable by morning. When he returns, he weighs a bundle into the scales, measures carefully, and grinds it into a fine powder for the tonic. The transaction passes without comment. Both clients leave with thanks and small purses lighter by a few copper coins. But within the hour, he realizes his mistake. The bundles, one valerian, the other comfrey, had been switched in the low light. The client with sleeplessness received the herb for joint pain, and vice versa. Panic rises briefly, but is soon tempered by relief. Neither herb is harmful, and both are gentle in their effects. The worst that will come, he decides, is a night without sleep or an ache that lingers one day longer. Yet in a small community, news travels not by urgency, but by curiosity and repetition. The young woman, finding no change in her child's sleep, returns to the apothecary with a hesitant question. The older man, joints still aching, wonders aloud whether the mixture was as it should be. Each asks, politely, if perhaps there was some confusion. The apothecary apologizes, explaining the error quietly, offering replacements without charge. Word slips from household to household. Did you hear? The apothecary nearly mixed up the herbs. Soon, each customer lingers at the counter, watching as the scales tip, as the weights balance, as each pinch is measured with extra care. The question, never quite accusatory, comes softly, "Are you certain of the measure?" In medieval towns, trust was woven through every transaction, but it was a fragile thread. Apothecaries, though respected, walked a careful line between knowledge and suspicion. Their shops, filled with mysterious powders and pungent oils, inspired both confidence and a quiet unease. Errors, however innocent, could shadow a reputation for years, coloring every exchange with a faint, unspoken doubt. The apothecary responded as best he could, by slowing his pace, double-checking each label, inviting customers to watch each preparation if they wished. He recited the names aloud, showed the plants before grinding, and welcomed questions with patience rather than irritation. His humility, over time, did much to restore trust, though some customers always lingered a moment longer, eyes flicking to the scale. No official record remains of such small mistakes, no ledger notes, no chronicler's pen. Yet the rhythm of the apothecary's life changed, if only a little. He grew more careful with each dusk, more mindful of the shadows in his shop and the tiredness that crept in after a long day. The memory of the switched bundles faded, replaced by newer stories and fresher gossip. But for a while, each measure of herbs was a test, each question a gentle reminder that trust, once shaken, is slow to mend. And so, the apothecary continued, balancing scales, weighing roots, and learning that even the smallest error, in the quiet hush of his shop, could echo through 100 evenings to come. The candlemaker who let a batch spoil in the molds, imagine yourself in the soft haze of a workshop just after sunrise, a place where every surface carries the faint sheen of wax and the deep, animal warmth of tallow. Shelves line the walls, filled with finished candles, some slender and smooth, others thick and squat, all destined for hearths and altars. The air is tinged with a sweetness that is not quite pleasant, yet familiar, a mingling of fat, smoke, and faintly perfumed oil. Here, in the quiet heart of a medieval town, lives the candlemaker. His hands are strong but stained, the skin of his fingers marked by years of dipping and molding. Candlemaking is both craft and routine. Tallow is rendered, strained, then poured into wooden or metal molds. Wick after wick is suspended with practiced ease. Timing, temperature, and patience are his constant companions, for a good candle must burn evenly and cleanly, neither too brittle nor too soft. On this particular morning, a stretch of unexpected warmth lingers from the previous day. The air, usually brisk, is heavy with humidity, and the workshop's small windows let in little breeze. The candlemaker, focused on his tasks, notes the change but presses on, as so many craftsmen do. There are orders to fulfill, churches in need of altar candles, neighbors awaiting lantern tapers, and merchants who will only pay for finished goods delivered on time. He heats the tallow, stirring steadily to keep it clear. He pours it carefully into the waiting molds, then sets them on the shelves to cool and harden. But as the hours slip by, the usual signs of success are absent. Instead of forming smooth, creamy cylinders, the tallow turns cloudy in the warmth, its texture uneven, riddled with small pockets and flaws. When he removes the first candles from their molds, their sides are marred with cracks and dimples, the wick off-center, the base misshapen. The flaw is not immediately visible to the untrained eye, but the candlemaker sees it at once. In a world where every craft is judged by its smallest details, such imperfections are more than a matter of pride. They are a risk. Candles that burn poorly may drip or gutter, leaving puddles of wax and flickering shadows where steady light is needed most. In the church, where candles stand for hours during Mass, a spoiled batch draws attention. The local priest will frown at the uneven flames. Parishioners will whisper, their words heavy with judgment and memory. Faced with a choice, the candlemaker does what he can. He sorts through the spoiled batch, setting aside the worst and salvaging those that might pass in poorer homes. The rest he sells at a loss, knowing that to hide the mistake would only make matters worse. Even so, the flawed candles find their way to the church's stone altar. Their wicks burn unsteadily, their light uncertain. The murmurs begin, soft at first, then louder as the candles are replaced more often, the wax left in untidy pools along the altar rail. The town is small, and news spreads gently but surely. Patrons who once trusted his steady work begin to drift away, seeking out other chandlers whose candles glow more reliably. Each week brings fewer orders, and the familiar weight of the candlemaker's satchel as he walks to the market is a little lighter than before. He continues his work, melting, pouring, trimming wicks, but the rhythm is changed, now edged by the quiet knowledge that trust, once lost, is slow to return. Yet life in the workshop goes on. The candlemaker sharpens his focus, adjusting his methods, seeking advice from older guild members or experimenting with mixtures and timing. He rises earlier on warm days, hoping to catch the coolest air. Sometimes he sets his molds in the cellar, where the stones keep the temperature low. Slowly, imperfectly, he restores the quality of his candles. Some patrons return, though not all. In the medieval world, a craftsman's reputation is his greatest wealth. Each mistake is a lesson, each flaw a cautionary tale. No ledger records the anxiety of a ruined batch, the quiet frustration as months of careful work are overshadowed by a single day's misjudgment. The market, always watchful, remembers both the successes and the failures, weaving them into the fabric of the town's memory. Candles themselves are more than simple tools. They are markers of hope, comfort, and reverence. A well-made candle lights the home, guides prayers, and eases the passage through long winter nights. When a batch spoils, the darkness feels closer, the community's trust dimmed if only for a while. Imagine the candlemaker late at night, seated beside a dwindling flame, the quiet of the workshop broken only by the faint tick of cooling metal. He examines a finished candle, running his thumb along its length, searching for flaws and finding none this time. Outside, the town is silent, its windows glimmering with steady points of light, some his own, some not. The spoiled batch, and the whispers it provoked, become part of his story, a lesson etched quietly in tallow and time, as much a part of his craft as the careful hand that pours, the eye that judges, and the patience that waits for the right moment to begin again. Let the workshop grow dim now, the day's mistakes fading with the last light. Tomorrow, the work will start anew, measured, careful, and shaped by memory, in the soft, persistent rhythm of a life spent making light for others. The clerk who forgot to seal a letter. Imagine a dimly lit chamber lined with shelves of parchment scrolls and ink pots, the scent of aged paper mingling with the faint smoke of a flickering candle. A clerk sits at a wooden desk, his quill poised over a fresh sheet of vellum. The quiet scratch of ink is the steady soundtrack of his work, copying records, composing letters, and managing the Lord's affairs. In medieval times, clerks played an essential role. They were the keepers of words and records, entrusted with preserving contracts, correspondence, and accounts. Their skill was measured not only by neat handwriting but by discretion and diligence. A misplaced word or misfiled document could have consequences far beyond the parchment. One day, the clerk completes a letter meant for a trusted ally of his lord. The message carries important information, nothing scandalous, but details that should remain private. Yet, in his routine or perhaps distracted by the pressing demands of the day, he forgets to seal the letter with the Lord's wax stamp, a mark that guaranteed authenticity and confidentiality. The letter travels on its journey. Without the seal, it is vulnerable. It falls into unintended hands, perhaps intercepted by rivals or curious servants. The information, though not damaging in itself, now appears exposed. Whispers arise in court and the manor, carelessness, negligence. For a clerk, reputation was fragile. Unlike knights or nobles, their power lay in trust. To be seen as careless was to lose their place at the table, and with it, livelihood and status. The Lord, relying on faithful record-keepers, could no longer ignore the mistake. A replacement was found, someone deemed more reliable. The clerk's name faded quietly, like smoke slipping through a window left ajar. No public disgrace, no loud accusation. Just a slow drifting away from responsibility and respect. This moment reflects the delicate nature of medieval administration. Power depended not only on strength or lineage but on the precise handling of information. Letters were not simply words on paper, they were tools of influence, diplomacy, and control. The sealing of a letter was more than ceremony. Wax stamps bore the unique impression of a lord's signet ring, serving as a signature and a safeguard. Broken seals warned of tampering. Without it, even the most loyal servant could be suspected of failing in their duty. The clerk's quiet fall from grace speaks to the human side of history, the small errors that ripple outward, the unspoken expectations, and the ever-watchful eyes of those in power. So, imagine once more that chamber, the soft candlelight, the scent of parchment, the gentle scratch of quill on vellum. Picture the unsealed letter, its words spilling beyond intended reach, and the silent consequence that followed. In this scene lies a story not of grand events but of trust lost in a moment's lapse. A story as old as record-keeping itself. The tailor who misplaced a piece of embroidery. Imagine yourself inside a cramped, dimly lit tailor's workshop, where bolts of rich fabric are stacked high and the scent of beeswax, linen, and freshly spun wool hangs in the air. A single window filters pale daylight onto a worn wooden bench cluttered with needles, threads, and delicate embroidery strips shimmering with gold and silk. This is where the work of transformation, turning raw cloth into garments fit for nobles, takes place. Among the many hands that crafted clothing in medieval England was one tailor, known simply in local memory as Master Thomas. He was respected for his skill with cut and stitch, especially in the intricate embroidery that adorned gowns and doublets. Such embellishments were costly and time-consuming, often commissioned by wealthy clients wishing to display status through fine workmanship. One day, Master Thomas received an important commission, a gown for a noblewoman, trimmed with a length of embroidery rumored to have come from a royal workshop. The embroidery was exquisite, gold thread woven through silk, delicate floral patterns that caught light like morning dew. It was a prized piece, and the tailor treated it with reverence, setting it carefully upon his bench as he worked. But when the garment was delivered and the noblewoman unrolled it in her chambers, a narrow strip of the embroidery was missing. The length was incomplete by several inches, and the loss was immediately noticed. To the noblewoman, the missing embroidery was not simply a flaw in craft. It was a slight to her honor, a sign of carelessness at best, or at worst, deliberate theft. Master Thomas swore he had seen the embroidery that morning. He promised it would be found, that it must have slipped under the workbench or been misplaced among his tools. But no trace ever appeared. The noblewoman's disappointment turned to frustration. She declined further commissions and shared the story with other patrons. What followed was a slow but steady erosion of trust. The rumor was not that Thomas had stolen the embroidery. There was no proof, no accusation laid at his door, but that he was unreliable. That was a different, and far more dangerous, charge. In a trade where reputation was currency, being seen as careless or forgetful could be as damaging as guilt. The marketplace is unforgiving. Word traveled fast through town and market alike. Patrons grew hesitant to entrust their precious fabrics to a tailor who might lose or misplace the finest threads. Over time, commissions dwindled, and Master Thomas found his workshop quieter, his bench less crowded. In medieval society, artisans depended heavily on repeat business and the recommendations of nobles and merchants. A single misstep, especially involving something as visible and precious as embroidery, could unravel years of careful work. Trust in a craftsman was as essential as the fabric's quality. Imagine the tailor's workshop again, tools laid out with care, the flickering flame of a candle casting dancing shadows on half-finished garments. Each stitch meant hours of focused labor, each thread a testament to skill. And yet, the loss of a small piece could undo all. The noblewoman's response reflected more than disappointment. It echoed the social hierarchies of the time. For her, The embroidery was a symbol of status and dignity. To receive less than promised was to be diminished in the eyes of peers. For Thomas, the loss was a burden he carried silently, the weight of suspicion pressing on every movement. This story reminds us of the delicate balances in medieval trades, where skill, honesty, and memory wove together to form a craftsman's reputation. It is a quiet cautionary tale about how trust, once broken or questioned, can shadow a lifetime of work. Master Thomas's fate was not marked by scandal or punishment. There were no trials, no public accusations. Yet in the soft murmur of market gossip, in the hesitant glances of former clients, his career quietly faded. And so, behind every seam and every stitch, there lies a story, not only of cloth and thread but of human frailty, trust, and the fragile threads that hold a community together. The fisher who left nets unmended. Imagine the soft hush of dawn along a rugged coastline, where waves lap gently against worn wooden boats tied to creaking piers. The air is thick with the salty tang of the sea, mingling with the faint brine of seaweed and driftwood. Fishermen, silhouetted against the pale morning light, ready their gear, knots being tightened, oars arranged, and nets prepared for the day's labor. Among them is a man whose livelihood depends on careful preparation and constant vigilance. His nets, woven from flax or hemp, are his most precious tools. Each knot ties a hope, each mesh a promise of the sea's generosity. Yet, on this day, one small tear remains unattended, a tiny gap in the woven web, easily overlooked but destined to have outsized consequences. Through the long night, as moonlight fades and stars give way to dawn, fish slip through that very tear. When the fisher hauls in his nets, they come up heavy with seaweed and empty air where the catch should have been. The water's bounty has escaped, invisible yet keenly felt. Word spreads quickly through the fishing village. Neighbors, seasoned and young alike, exchange knowing glances. Some sigh quietly, others shake their heads, their disappointment mingling with concern. For in such communities, small failures are more than accidents. They become measures of a man's diligence, character, and worth. The fisher's neglect was not simply a moment's lapse. It was seen as a sign, a symbol of carelessness that might herald harder days ahead. In a world where survival depended on skillful labor and constant attention, such oversights threatened not only the individual but the fragile balance of village life. Daily rhythms in fishing villages were unforgiving. Nets needed mending after every haul, knots retied, ropes inspected for wear. The sea was unpredictable and generous only when met with respect and effort. A broken net meant lost food, diminished trade, and worry for families counting on the next meal. The fisher, aware of the eyes turned toward him, likely felt the weight of expectation deepen with each silent judgment. His neighbor's regard, built over years of shared toil, was fragile, easily shaken by a single mistake. Stories of past catches and missteps became the fabric of communal memory, reinforcing lessons about responsibility and care. Yet, this story is not simply about blame. It speaks to the delicate relationship between humans and nature, and the constant vigilance demanded by life near the water. It reminds us that in small villages, every action ripples outward, touching many lives in subtle but significant ways. Mending nets was as much a social act as a practical one. Gatherings on the shore, especially in the evening, often included communal work to repair gear. Stories were told, songs sung, and knowledge passed between generations. To leave a tier unattended was to step outside this shared rhythm, even if only briefly. The fisher's day ended much as it began, in quiet reflection by the water's edge. Perhaps he resolved to repair his nets with greater care. Perhaps the loss weighed heavily, a reminder that even the smallest detail matters. For the village, his failure became a lesson, whispered to those who would take nets to sea in years to come. Through this lens, the tale holds a gentle, enduring truth. Life's work is woven from countless small acts of attention. Neglect, even momentary, can unravel more than rope. It can loosen trust, fray reputations, and unsettle communities. So, as you imagine the past, the steady rhythm of coastal life, the scent of salt and seaweed, the creak of wooden boats, remember him. The fisher who left nets unmended, who whose small tear allowed the catch to slip away, and whose story reminds us all of the quiet power held in care and vigilance. The mason's apprentice who dropped a tool from the scaffold. Imagine a sunlit worksite in a medieval town, the sky a pale wash above unfinished stone. You hear the steady sound of hammers and chisels, echoing between half-built walls and piles of limestone blocks. Dust hangs in the air, catching the light in shifting motes. The day is warm, but inside the scaffolding, a web of rough timber, lashed with rope, there's a quiet sense of order and focus. Every tool has its place, every movement is watched, for in this world, safety is hard-won and easily lost. Among the laborers is a young apprentice, not yet grown into the strength or confidence of the older masons. He's tasked with simple jobs, fetching mortar, carrying stones, passing up buckets and tools. Each day, he climbs the scaffolding with careful steps, learning the rhythm of the work, the measured pace set by those around him. The master mason keeps a keen eye on all, especially the apprentices. Reputation and safety are as important as the stones themselves. On this afternoon, the apprentice's hands are slick with sweat, his arms tired from the weight of limestone. He fumbles a chisel as he moves to pass it along. A small slip, hardly worth a word on any other ground. But here, high above the street, the tool slides from his grip, bouncing once on the planks before tumbling down to the stones below. The noise rings out, louder than it ought to be, drawing every gaze in the yard. A passerby, perhaps on their way to the market, stops short just beyond the scaffold's shadow. The chisel lands near their feet, close enough to scatter dust on their shoes. For a long moment, the world seems to pause. No harm done, but a hush descends. The master mason is the first to speak, his words calm but heavy with meaning. In this trade, luck is respected but never trusted. A single mistake, even without injury, carries weight. Work resumes, but the mood has changed. The apprentice is quieter now, his hands steadier but his mind elsewhere. He finishes his tasks with care, eyes lowered. At the end of the day, as the sun dips behind the rooftops and the tools are gathered, the master mason calls him aside. The message is gentle, almost sorrowful. A place on this site demands attention, and a single lapse can endanger all. The apprentice is dismissed before dusk, his lessons unfinished. Medieval guilds valued both skill and discipline. Mistakes on a building site could not only slow a project, but invite danger, suspicion, or worse. In the close world of stonemasons, news traveled quickly. Word of a dropped tool, a close call, or a master's decision would pass from one site to the next, becoming part of the quiet lore of the trade. For the apprentice, the days that followed were heavy with regret. He found work elsewhere, hauling sand, mixing lime, or tending the fires in a blacksmith's yard. He carried the story with him, quietly replaying the moment when grip slipped and luck held. Each new task was performed with double care. When he finally found work again on a building site, it was at the edge of town, under the eye of another mason. The lesson was never far from his thoughts. Every movement mattered, and every tool demanded respect. He never forgot the feel of the chisel sliding free, the sound as it struck stone, the sharp intake of breath from those who watched. The memory followed him, shaping the way he worked for years after. Some nights, as he drifted to sleep, he heard the clatter in his dreams, a small mistake with long echoes. Yet, over time, the story softened. He gained skill, and those who worked with him learned to trust his careful ways. The memory of dismissal faded into a quiet caution, a reminder that even the smallest slip can become a turning point. In later years, as he trained apprentices of his own, he told them the story not as a warning, but as an invitation to attention. Every hand must be steady. Every tool must be respected. Sometimes what you carry is not just a chisel, but the trust of those around you. History does not remember the apprentice's name. The building he helped raise stands still, its stones weathered smooth by centuries. The chisel is long lost, buried in dust. But the story endures, whispered in the scaffold's shade, a lesson carried from one pair of hands to the next. The cook who served undercooked meat at a feast. Imagine yourself in the gentle chaos of a medieval kitchen, long before sunrise. The fire is already glowing in the great hearth, warming the stone floor as cooks, kitchen boys, and scullions shuffle past one another in the dim morning light. The air is heavy with the scents of onions, parsley, simmering broth, and the faint wood smoke curling up the chimney. Metal ladles clink against cauldrons. The dull chop of knives on worn boards is a constant, comforting rhythm. At the center of this steady whirl stands the cook, a figure both respected and burdened. His hands are skilled, marked by small scars and years of work. He knows how to coax flavor from tough cuts of mutton, how to stretch grain and fat into satisfying pottage, how to judge the readiness of bread by scent alone. Each day's menu is a quiet negotiation between ambition and the realities of the storeroom, a careful weighing of what can be spared, what must be saved, what will please those who sit at the high table. Tonight is a feast, and the pressure is palpable. The manor's lord celebrates a birthday or perhaps a long-awaited guest. Servants bustle with extra urgency, and the cook directs his staff in calm, clipped tones. Roasting meat for such an occasion is both an honor and a risk. The fire's heat is uneven, the kitchen is crowded and noisy. Platters must be timed precisely so that nothing arrives cold, nothing waits too long by the flames. The cook checks again, relying on practiced instinct and fleeting glimpses in the shifting firelight. As the meal is carried out, the hall quiets in anticipation. Guests laugh and settle into their seats as silver platters appear, each dish arranged with care. The scent of roast fills the hall, mingling with wax and fresh bread. The cook stands in the kitchen's shadowed doorway, watching. It is a moment both thrilling and anxious, a silent hope that all will go as planned. But then, in the hush, a noble cuts into his portion and pauses. The meat, still pink at the center, glistens in the candlelight. A servant, trained to notice such moments, leans in, and the error is quickly relayed. Another plate is fetched, the dish quietly replaced, but the moment has already shifted. Around the table, glances pass between guests. A few raise eyebrows. Some murmur, their voices soft but pointed. The meal continues. Laughter and music slowly return, and the rest of the evening passes without further trouble. Yet the story of the undercooked meat, the small breach in the unspoken contract of trust between cook and lord, has already taken root. In the days that follow, it is retold with gentle relish by those who savor tales of small failures, the way people do when life's routines offer little else to remark upon. The noble's pause becomes longer in each retelling, the shade of pink more vivid, the cook's reputation a little less certain. For the cook, the consequences unfold quietly but persistently. The manor's steward, seeking to avoid another mishap, recommends a different cook for the next feast. Households that once competed for his skill hesitate, preferring safer choices. The cook finds work, but never for long in one place. He prepares hearty stews and crisp flatbreads, serves travelers and merchants, and sometimes, in smaller households, even oversees modest celebrations. Each time he arrives in a new kitchen, he feels the unspoken question in the air. Is this the cook from the story? The medieval world is a tapestry woven from memory and gossip, each person's reputation both shield and shadow. Kitchens are places of quiet endurance. Mistakes, even small ones, are rarely forgotten. The story of the undercooked meat is retold by maids at laundry streams, by merchants in busy markets, by children who listen and giggle at the misfortune of those who serve at high tables. The cook learns to endure the gentle sting of these stories, just as he endures the burns and blisters of his trade. In time, the cook becomes known less for his one mistake and more for his steadiness, his quiet competence. He never boasts, never rebuts the tales. Instead, he rises early, sharpens his knives, and watches the fire with a practiced eye. He develops new habits, checking, always checking, even at the cost of overcaution. He comes to know the value of patience, the importance of humility, and the strange comfort of routine. Imagine the kitchen late at night, after the rush has faded. The last pots are scrubbed clean, the hearth banked for morning. The cook sits alone, a small cup of broth warming his hands. Outside, the hall is silent, candles guttering low. He listens to the soft crackle of the dying fire, remembering the feast, not as a disaster, but as a lesson. He has learned how quietly stories move through a manner, how small moments outlast even the finest meal. In the end, he continues much as before, one meal at a time, one kitchen after another. The story follows him, softened by repetition, until it is less accusation than local color, a gentle reminder of fallibility in a world where perfection is always just out of reach. Even as others take his place in grander halls, the cook finds a measure of peace in his work. The simple comfort of food well made, the quiet satisfaction of feeding the hungry, and the soft, enduring rhythm of a life lived in service to others. Let the kitchen grow still now, the air thick with memory and the last traces of smoke. Let the story of the cook, and the noble's pause, and the small murmur of disappointment, fade gently into the background, part of the endless, imperfect song of daily life, always lingering just beneath the surface, and always, somehow, continuing on.